WRCR Radio, 1700 AM, rocking your health and rocking the law. Let's get started with the show.
All right, everybody. Good evening. I'm Patty Finn, the Good Health Lawyer, and you're listening to WRCR Radio, 1700 AM, New York Talk Radio. We're streaming live on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram for now. And you can also check out the show on WRCR.com. We have a really exciting show tonight. I am so happy with our guests. We have attorney Ray Flores and attorney Greg Glaser. Many of you know Greg. He's been on the show before. This is my first time interviewing Ray, who's, you know, a remarkable attorney. And before we get to our guests, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Bernadette Pager. Bernadette, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you loud and clear. How
Great.
are you?
Well, you know, today's day one in Washington State for our legislative session. So we're buckled up, ready to go, trying to do this mostly remotely, as they have an 8-foot fence around our state capitol and 2 layers of armed National Guard people keeping the public away from the capitol.
Oh, that's terrible. It's only 8 feet. You don't have a 16-foot fence. I know things are really difficult right now, and people all over the United States are extremely stressed, and, you know, with good reason. Censorship is out of control. I mean, it's very difficult to get out anywhere. I mean, fortunately, we're still on live radio in the New York listening area. And I think we go out to over 1 million listeners in this area. And that's a really good thing. And I know we're still happening on Facebook, which, you know, I say that wondering, you know, when they're going to yank me too. But anyway, we only have an hour and it seems to fly by. And I'd like to introduce my guests, attorney Ray Flores and attorney Greg Glaser. Ray is a driven attorney that will truly represent your interests in many legal matters anywhere in California. His primary focus is representing sales representatives under the California Civil Code, and he has successfully represented plaintiffs and defendants in numerous juries and court trials since 2004. The reason we have Ray and Greg on the show tonight is they are requesting a federal court to issue an order immediately protecting all Americans from discrimination based on vaccination status. I have trouble even reading that. I'm so happy that you guys are doing this. Greg, as many of you know, Greg Glaser is a health freedom lawyer in California. He is general counsel for Physicians for Informed Consent, and they are a nonprofit organization opposed to vaccine mandates. These are my kind of lawyers. Greg is also lead counsel for the Control Group, a pilot survey of unvaccinated Americans filing federal litigation in 2020 to support the right to remain unvaccinated. Greg was recently called a human vaccine encyclopedia for his work with the litigation team opposing the UC's mandatory flu shot. He is passionate about organic living and the Constitution, and I can tell you yes to all of that. So anyway, without further ado, I'll introduce Ray and Greg. And why don't you guys, I'll start with Ray. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the lawsuit and what we can expect?
Well, sure. I'd like to start off by saying I think we can expect the president to issue an executive order putting a pause on all vaccine mandates nationwide. I believe that this is a very well-conceived lawsuit petition, conceived of and brought by Greg Glaser, the lead attorney, to rather than take on the CDC and the HHS and all these alphabet agencies, Greg has figured out that the only way to put an end to all of this is to have the president cut through all the red tape and offer the only remedy that is really needed at this time.
But Ray, which president? Are you talking about President Trump, or, we only have a few days left?
A good question. It's the office of the president that's the defendant.
So
it would transfer them.
I think, with President Trump, he's been a lot more reasonable about vaccines. How do you think it's going to go, or how do you assess the new commander-in-chief and his response? Will it be any different?
Well, assuming that he does become commander-in-chief, which all appearances point in that direction at this time, it's the judge who makes the ultimate decision, and that's why we're bringing it in federal court, and that's why we've introduced or filed thousands and thousands of documents supporting our position, and I'll let Greg speak to that.
Okay.
Yes, thank you so much. The lawsuit is brought in court because we're asking for a court order, and the court order would protect all Americans from mandatory vaccination. The president's cooperation would be of great assistance toward the order, but it's technically not necessary to achieve a court order. And our case documents cite many examples where the executive, whether it's a governor or even the president of the United States, is ordered to do something that that executive does not want to do. Probably the most famous example in our generation is desegregation of schools. But more recent examples include letting kids back into school, cleaning up prisons, and things like that, where a court orders the executive, even a president of the United States, to take some action to clean up society. And here, the unvaccinated are the healthiest people on the planet, and we need to learn from them what they are doing, because our data, which is for the first time introduced in a court of law, our data shows that the unvaccinated are exponentially healthier. And not just a few orders of magnitude, many orders of magnitude, that to the point where it becomes impossible, statistically impossible, that our data could be by accident. We have proven causation. We've proven that vaccines are causing this chronic illness pandemic in our country. Our nation is being decimated by vaccinations. And we have the opportunity for the first time to learn from the unvaccinated in a way where we're also protecting America, protecting society. And so Ray and I will be in court on February 22nd, George Washington's birthday, to request a court order protecting all Americans.
Oh, that's great. It'll be Washington's birthday. I got an executive order here in New York. I got an injunction in New York last year, and I restrained the county executive here in Rockland County, who had issued an executive order prohibiting all non-vaccinated children from public places. And I was successful in proving there was no measles emergency. Are you guys trying to prove there is no COVID or other health-related emergency, or are you going about it trying to show that the non-vaccinated are healthier and the vaccines are posing a risk.
Yes, it's kind of similar to both. That first, that the unvaccinated are exponentially healthier and therefore are creating no risk. Whatever the unvaccinated are doing, we all need to be doing. And secondly, the unvaccinated, just by their very existence, help science. They help everything that we all agree on and want to achieve. The United States government, private industry, everyone agrees, let's do science. Well, I look up in the encyclopedia the scientific method, and you know what it requires? A control group. It literally requires that we maintain this group of people, the unvaccinated. So as much as people like Bill Gates can't stand the unvaccinated, I'm sorry, Bill Gates, you gotta let them exist. It's the only way to maintain the scientific method. And what Ray and I did is we submitted to the court a request for judicial notice. So that encyclopedia entry, scientific encyclopedia entry on the scientific method we are asking the court to recognize the authority of that encyclopedia. It's called judicial notice. And once the court accepts it, then everyone in the case is bound to that definition. So we'll have a definition that says scientific method requires a control group. We'll also have a definition that says what a placebo is. And guess what? A placebo is not another vaccine. A placebo is literally a substance that is inert. It causes no harm to an individual. And every single vaccine in the history of vaccinology, and I looked through it all, has never used a placebo for its short-term, long-term studies. They never do it. They never look at a control because, for obvious reasons, it's the control group is the one thing the government and pharma will not touch. They're so afraid of the unvaccinated because they know the unvaccinated are the healthiest people on the planet. I mean, and by the way, I need to get into the numbers because the numbers tell the best picture. 60% of Americans have a chronic illness, okay? That is a massive number. 60% have one chronic illness. 42% have two chronic illnesses and 12% have 5. If you have 5 chronic illnesses, you're basically on death's door, you're dying. And 2 chronic illnesses, life is tough. Life is hard. If you have two things you could just never get rid of, just chronically, you're always fighting it, have to alter your lifestyle. America is being decimated. So that is the vaccinated population. But then we looked at 1,482 unvaccinated Americans. That's a massive number. That's more than the CDC looks at for tons of their stuff where they're setting national policy. So we have above 99% confidence. And when we looked at the unvaccinated, their numbers are 5% and lower of chronic illness. That means that I have to paint a picture. Imagine that you're living on a street, okay? On your block, there's 100 people who live on your street. If that street is all vaccinated, then half of everybody has got some issue. But if you go one street over to the 100 unvaccinated people, less than 5% have that. So that's it's like taking a time machine back to the 1950s where everybody's healthy. You go to school, maybe only one person in the entire school has a special needs. But now today, it's every other child has something: ADHD, autism, allergies. Allergies is very prominent, digestive disorders. And we prove all of this with our science graphs.
The complaint is remarkable. I mean, it must have taken you forever to put it together. Ray, was it a difficult undertaking?
Well, we had a team of scientists help us.
Dr. Thomas, right? And Dr. Weiler?
It was a variety.
Yeah, with regard to the specific members of the team, we have the expert witnesses who are recognized in the court. And so that would be the first place to look for people, is they could look at the declarations that we filed in court. But yes, just as Ray said, we have a great team, and all of this was presented and vetted because what we're doing is we're giving the court the most authoritative presentation possible, the most recognized of all science exhibits, because then the court and also the state cannot argue. They have to recognize their own admissions. For example, when the Institute of Medicine says, and they said it twice, that they've never done a vax versus unvax study, well, there you have it. There you have it right there. They don't have the numbers. And so in our case, and as Ray will also highlight, we always come back to the numbers.
Right, that's great. Ray, what do you think about all that?
Well, the technique that was used is a tool called the request for judicial notice. And so rather than have to have an expert or a witness or some other person called into court in order to say that Tuesday the 20th, Tuesday was the 20th, the 20th of February was a Tuesday, excuse me, then you don't need to have a witness. You could just have the court take judicial notice of it. And so it's a fact that has to be adjudicated as such and given to the jury that, okay, jury, I know you didn't hear any testimony from any witness that the 20th of February was a Tuesday, but you have to accept that as true. And so the same facts that Greg is bringing up, we have over 4,000 pages of documents that we're asking the court to rule on that will accept every one of those facts as a fact. And as Greg said, the beauty of those words is that each one of them is, in a sense, either a confession or a statement that cannot be refuted, in the same way that all you have to do is look at the calendar and know what day of the week February 20th was 3 years ago.
That's really
Right.
remarkable. If I can interject, I've relied heavily on the Institute of Medicine and their reports. And for years, they've been reporting that there's absolutely zero safety data on the school-required vaccines and the combination of the school-required vaccines. So I agree with you. I think that's, brilliant. Did you want to say something, Greg?
Yes, yeah, I wanted to add a point as well, which is that when we request judicial notice, we are requesting the court to recognize that these are the facts that public health officials know in their work. And so others who are not public health officials, like my mother and also my dentist, they are not held to the same standard. So that means that our case is centered around this idea that it's the public health apparatus that's really pushing all of these mandates, that's creating this predicament where there's just more vaccines, more mandates. It's this vicious cycle, and society just is on this trajectory. It's a public health problem. And so when we are requesting judicial notice, we're saying, Judge, by the public health officials' own documents, by their own knowledge base, they recognize all of these vaccine dangers. Granted, there's going to be more vaccine dangers than are listed in just our request for judicial notice. But what this does is it tells you the state of mind of the public health official. And that state of mind is in the context of what? The fact that they've never done the vax versus unvax study. They won't touch it. So they have all of this evidence of harm, all of this evidence of danger, and they've never done a true scientific method control group study. And yet they still claim safe and effective. So it's like 0 + 0 = 2. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. So Ray and I will always bring it back to one thing: show us the numbers. It's like a mantra. Any expert slogans, safe and effective, are meaningless. You have to start with a true risk value. Like literally, you need a number. First the number, then the statements. They can make almost any statements they want, but they have to start with a number. And that's the job of Ray and I. We're going to hold them to it.
That's really great. Bernadette, did you have any questions for our guests?
I'm not at this point. I'm just listening eagerly, but I also want to report that we're shadow banned on Facebook. Patty, this is not showing anywhere on your page.
Yeah,
People
I
are
know.
texting me. They're not able
We're
to see
working
it.
that.
So I'm
Are
hoping
you
that
banned there on Facebook?
it's, yeah, so I hope you're recording to the cloud so
We
that we
are.
can find alternative places to show this. So this is a very important conversation. I'm glad you're recording it.
It is, and we are recording it. And I all weekend I was watching, Newsmax and on and all that, and all they show is a picture of President Trump grimacing,
Yeah.
and you can't hear any audio or video. I'm hoping that the president does something about that. And counsel, I want to ask you, not to digress, but I don't know if you're familiar with that Columbia case that was brought against President Trump for blocking Twitter users. Do you guys know about that? Anyway, the court held in the Second Circuit that Trump could not ban Twitter users because it was a public forum. And if is it a private company or a public forum? And I say, well, the Second Circuit in that case held it was a public forum. Therefore, the president would have a right of speech, don't you think? Don't you think so? What if he wanted to contest your case? What if he wanted to go on the media and Twitter or Instagram and tell Americans his view? Maybe he agrees. What do you think about that?
Ray?
I think censorship is a major problem right now. And if they have a 280 authorization, then maybe something could be done about that, to where they're getting all these benefits and they're not living up to their purpose of being able to be an open forum for communication of free ideas.
I mean, I think it's really remarkable that we live in the United States and the president has been banned. And it seems to me like everybody is ganging up on him. And, what I like about your lawsuit is, over the years, I've brought a lot of different cases, and as you know, as lawyers, it's a mixed bag. You win some, you lose some. But I was very impressed about the way you went about it. I liked the judicial notice. I loved the fact that it was so fact-based, so packed with data. And I thought, how is it that these guys were able to pull this together and even pay for it? I mean, do you have any fundraising going on that you might want to share?
Yeah, sure. Well, we are community supported, which is so excellent. And we are not working, at full hours or anything like that, where we're getting paid for all of our work. It is not like that at all. The reason why is because we are so committed to this. This is our passion. We understand the stakes here. This is about saving the country from the enemy, which is big pharma. They are the enemy at the gates. They are taking down children. They are taking down adults. The data shows it. It is like, one of the key points in our court documents is the reference to John Snow, father of epidemiology. And all he did was he looked at well A and well B. Some people were drinking from well A and getting cholera, and everyone drinking from well B didn't get cholera. All you need to be is a kindergartner to understand this. If you drink from well A, you get cholera. That's called causation. If you drink from well B, you don't get cholera, which means well B doesn't have cholera. Like John Snow got all this credit, but really it could have been John Snow's, grandson, the kindergartner, who was like, hey, let's just look at well A and well B. That it's so simple, and yet pharma conflates the whole thing. They want to have endless discussions and of their system of vaccinology. But really, it just comes down to a simple measure of causation. And that's the job of Ray and I in court, is to go in and prove that causation, that vaccines are causing chronic illness. And you can prove it by comparing well A to well B.
That's really remarkable. You know, in vaccine court where I practice, you can't get any discovery. The presumption is that any FDA approved vaccine is safe. And COVID's not even FDA approved, and it's being mass distributed. But that lack of ability to get discovery has really hamstrung us all along. And anybody that is injured by a vaccine, I mean, I don't fault the special masters or the Department of Justice. I think that, you know, they believe what they're doing is correct. And, you know, that's what litigation is. You have two sides. But I do sense an overwhelming unfairness in that, you know, you can't even question anything about ingredients, combinations of vaccines. And anybody that doesn't know, children right now in the United States, by the time they're 18, are up to, I think, 68 vaccines. And they're for all kinds of things that are really not even a threat. Again, you know, back to measles last year, everybody in New York was, you know, terrified of a measles outbreak. And, you know, fortunately, we had a local judge here who did the math. He said, well, let's look at it. We have 166 cases. We have 350,000 people. It comes to 0.06 of the population, and that is not an epidemic. Which actually leads me to my next point. Have you addressed whether or not we have an epidemic of corona or any other disease that you're challenging?
No, our case focuses on the fact that COVID-19 has created a hysteria around infectious disease, where the government has decided to overreach to push an obviously experimental vaccine. Everybody knows it's experimental. And in our case, we're actually saying all vaccines are experimental, but at least everyone agrees COVID-19 vaccine is experimental. And so the existence of the COVID-19, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, you know, we don't get into that. And we do just highlight that this new experimental vaccine is already shown to be dangerous. And moreover, the only way you'll ever know just how dangerous is if you compare a group of totally unvaccinated people.
And they're eliminating our control group, right? Aren't they? They're going to vaccinate them.
Yeah, it's correct? You know, our job is to go into court and get a preservation of evidence order. The bodies of the unvaccinated are the evidence. They are the best evidence. They are the only evidence. And the job of a court is to preserve evidence. And we are asking the court to recognize the utility of these studies, these surveys, and moreover, not just the totally unvaccinated. You know, there might be studies in the future of the partially vaccinated. Regardless, we need to protect everyone. Yes. The point here is that everybody has the right and ethic of informed consent.
But what about the control group? Are you taking any effort? Well, you already said no, but I think in a COVID-related hysteria case, one of the things that needs to be done is some kind of legal action to preserve the control group. What do you think about that, Bernadette? I mean, Dr. Thomas and Dr. James Lyons Weiler had talked a lot about that. What do you think?
Oh, definitely. I just think it's criminal for them to be discussing just because these vaccines have emergency use. stop the phase 3 studies early and eliminate the control group and prevent us from ever really being able to determine, at least in the gold standard method, whether or not these vaccines cause long-term harm. And I did want to bring up in an open letter that I drafted to the Oregon Medical Board about Dr. Paul, 2 questions that I ask that I believe that this lawsuit we're discussing here today are very relevant. And question 1 is symptom avoidance through vaccine exposure leading to healthier children or healthier population? And clearly anybody who has done any sort of fully non-vax to vaccinated, they know the answer is no.
No,
Avoiding
exactly. Yeah.
symptoms of temporary disease by being exposed to these products does not lead to healthier outcomes. And what we've seen with COVID-19 is a deliberate, systemic, industry-wide, public health-wide silencing, censoring of treatments. And we have the same thing. Anytime the industry decides they're going to target a contagious infection with a vaccine, adequate treatments to ensure you don't have severe cases and you don't have fatal cases are absolutely sidelined. And to me, that is a crime against humanity. People are dying of COVID-19 who, if they had been treated early, would not have got a severe case. They would not have died. And it's the same for all infection. If the rate of death to measles prior in the early 60s, prior to the vaccine coming out, if the rate of death was just 400 to 500 in the United States in 1962, wouldn't by 2021 we be able to reduce that even further, right? And allow people to have the vigorous lifetime immunity that experiencing measles when you're 6 gives you, as opposed to maybe 20 years of protection. So
Well
I
said.
sorry. Oh,
Yeah,
thank you.
well said.
The second point on your letter also is covered in the federal statute. The emergency use authorization. Is that where you got that second point for your letter, that second question?
Does exposure to the ingredients of vaccines produce healthier children? Or is symptom avoidance through vaccine exposure leading to healthier children?
The one where you were highlighting that the emergency use authorization for the vaccine, that it part of the informed consent document has to specify any alternatives to the vaccine. And I think you were highlighting that it's criminal that these are not considerations. Well, I mean, not just criminal, but violation of federal law. I mean, if they're not highlighting the alternatives, that's fundamental informed consent. And it all comes back to our society's ability to recognize that one size fits all doesn't work. And also, we have to learn how to count as a people, not just elections. Oh, mercy. Do we ever learn how to do that right? But I'm holding out, by the way. I still believe President Trump is coming through. I'm a holdout. Okay.
You know, Greg, I just interject for a minute. I remember in New York here, it's really heavily liberal Democrat. I don't care who's listening, and I'm not. I'm kind of old school conservative. And when Hillary Clinton lost the election, there were people weeping, hysterical. And I thought, oh, get over it. I feel like crying about President Trump. I am so devastated about, what has happened. And look at how people are ganging up on him. Everybody is ganging up on him. Everybody abandoned him, even the lawyers. I mean, you must see that. He's having a lot of problem pulling a legal team together. Have you noticed? I mean, we have Rudy Giuliani in front of the Four Seasons here in New Jersey. And, I mean, I don't think that makes someone a bad lawyer because they're older, but you really need a young team. You need a team. You can't be 20 years out of a courtroom and then try to go in and fight, especially the government lawyers. They are tuned up. I mean, the DOJ lawyers, which will be defending your case, You know, they are well-funded, well-educated, and they have the same arguments over and over again. Do you know who the lawyers are for the other side?
Yes, and you are correct. It is a member of the Attorney General's office in Sacramento, and I've spoken with him. And I don't think, though, it's a fair fight. I mean, they don't. The DOJ doesn't have the numbers. They don't have the data. We have all the data. I mean, we should have given them 6 months to prepare, because we've certainly prepared for far longer than that. Then nothing they can do can ever change the simple fact that they've never compared well A to well B. And as long as I can succeed in emphasizing that point to the court, then it doesn't matter how talented the DOJ is, how, even how influential they are. It's
I know
so simple.
In vaccine court, the court does pay attorney's fees, but you have to carry these cases, for a long, long time. And you're generally dealing with parents that have, sick or deceased children. And, it is very, very difficult. So it's the U.S. Attorney General, right? That's who you're up against. Who's your judge? Do you know?
Yes, Judge William Shub, who is a conservative judge. And
that's good.
We expect to receive a fair hearing, and we will be definitely making sure that there is a clean record in the case. Our colleague Rick Jaffe, by the way, has called Ray Flores an ace litigator, and Ray has an exceptional eye for detail and great in the courtroom, and he's a winner. And so we both very much look forward to February 22. Our day in court.
I love Rick Jaffe. He is so amazing. Even the way he's blogging, he makes lawyering sound, I don't know, like a tweet. Like he's able to take these very complicated subjects. I heard his oral argument in the UC case, and I thought he was really, really good. But you know what I did notice about that case? The last 2 minutes, when the issue of the level of scrutiny came up. And that was the only point in the entire argument where he said, well, it should be strict scrutiny applied. And by then it seemed like the judge already had made up his mind. But maybe, Ray, you could talk about the level of scrutiny, what that means, and what you expect here.
Well, sure. First of all, the right to bodily integrity in California and education is a fundamental right. There's numerous constitutional rights. We are suing. Our petition includes violations of several constitutional points that are being infringed upon by mandates. We include the 8th Amendment for cruel and unusual punishment. We include the 13th Amendment regarding indentured servitude, even slavery, so to speak, that we're being turned into these subjects for medical experiments. We have the right to bodily integrity. We have the right to privacy. We have the right to our own religious practices. So the First Amendment, yes, exactly. So strict scrutiny will apply in this case. It's just simply a matter of bringing all the points forward.
Let me ask you about Jacobson. As everybody knows, or anybody who listens to my show, in 1905, the Supreme Court had issued a ruling in Jacobson versus Massachusetts. And in that case, the court held that mandatory vaccines do not violate the Constitution. Now, we know that the Supreme Court pulled back on that just the slightest bit last month in the Roman Catholic Archdiocese case here in New York. And we had those lawyers on here a couple of weeks ago, and they managed to get an injunction in the Supreme Court to allow, there was a capacity restriction in churches and synagogues in Brooklyn. And Judge Gorsuch said, even in a pandemic, you know, the Constitution still applies. So with that said, what about Jacobson? What about all the cases that have come along? And there was a lot in New York and a lot in California that basically wiped out any previous claim. Now, I don't think these claims were the way you went about it. I love the scientific method and the strategy that you're using. But what are you going to do when the United States attorney gets up and says, Judge, you know, look at Jacobson, constitutional vaccination mandates do not violate the Constitution. What is your answer? Ray, I'm going to ask you first.
Sure. Jacobson and its prodigy seem to condone vaccination for a variety of areas, but Jacobson itself never really ruled on that. They only ruled that rather than pay a $5 fine,
That's right.
then he had to get a vaccine or leave the jurisdiction. Also, they deferred, they punted in a sense by only saying that the state had police power under the 10th Amendment to require these safety measures. But they never ruled on the constitutionality of the vaccine itself. And so in a pandemic then, or in a certain emergency, then they were allowed to have certain restrictions, fines, mandates, so to speak, if you will, but they also had to have an out as well. And I mean, Jacobson's been used to justify everything, even sterilization under Buck v. Bell in 1927. So finally, now Jacobson, when you shepherdize it, has a giant Q after it, which means that it's a questionable case. And so Catholic Diocese, Agudath, Israel versus Cuomo accomplished a lot. And
oh my God, that was a great case. That was really, really good. You know, the whole time those lawyers were in court, I started emailing them, you know, your cases and everybody else's, anything I could think of. And I thought, this guy's probably, I get emails like that. I said, I think this guy's going to think I'm crazy. But, you know, when they won, apparently they were willing to come on our show. So I didn't scare them off as a stalker health lawyer. But I agree with you about Jacobson. And I think it's time to, you know, flip that. Greg, I'm going to ask you, though, about strict scrutiny. What do you think about that? And maybe you could tell our listeners the difference between a rational basis, intermediate, and strict scrutiny case.
Sure. So normally public health laws are presumed to be valid. And so anyone challenging that public health law will be brought into court, and the judge will say, well, I'm just going to presume that the legislature knew what they were doing, or the health officer knew what they were doing. So unless the public health officer acted irrationally, unless there is no rational basis for the health officer's rule, then I'm just going to uphold it as constitutional. That's the normal situation. But there are also other situations calling for strict scrutiny, which is what we want in our case. We are asking the court to order that any health rules must be strictly scrutinized, because there must be a compelling government interest to support and that interest must be narrowly tailored to the government objective. And the reason why we employ strict scrutiny is because we're dealing with fundamental rights, the fundamental right to bodily integrity, the fundamental right to practice your religious beliefs. And and our case frames the issue. We're talking about things that, vaccination, it's experimental because it's never been subject to, long-term testing. And it is highly invasive. It doesn't get more invasive than the government injecting you with something. I mean, come on. I mean, and if that doesn't trigger strict scrutiny, then nothing should.
I
right?
agree
And
with
so,
you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me, can I just make a point though about the Ninth Amendment and the penumbra of unenumerated rights? I know in a case that I had here in New York, Phillips versus City of New York, the court said that I could not reach the Ninth Amendment, that I could not raise a Ninth Amendment claim if I couldn't prove a First Amendment violation. And that case, they relied on Jacobson. They said Jacobson says no constitutional violation for a mandatory vaccine, and that the Ninth Amendment is not an independent right, that you have to segue through another amendment. Have you guys thought about that? Or
yeah. And I also read that opinion in your case. We have a novel Ninth Amendment argument that is beautiful. It is that all citizens have the right to be peacefully natural, meaning that this comes from the fundamental thing that we learn in law school. And many of us gloss over it. Many of us lawyers gloss over it. We don't think about it, but it's so fundamental. I have to bring it up. It's really exciting. So listeners, tune in here. Okay. So why can't the government make it a crime to have brown eyes? Why? And in law school, we're told the reason why the government cannot criminalize having brown eyes. The answer is because there is no way for a brown-eyed person to avoid the force of the law. They're just inherently a criminal. You can't be born a criminal. That's the unvaccinated. They're born unvaccinated, or you're born Jewish, or you're born this or that.
Brilliant.
You can't. And so that's our Ninth Amendment argument. So you have the absolute right to be peacefully natural. And then we cite cases, like famous cases like Yick Wo versus Hopkins, the origin of sovereignty. And I don't just cite the Ninth Amendment and say, we have this right to be natural, leave us alone. I put it in context, the context of our petitioners, which is that they are afraid of CPS, right? They're afraid of somebody coming in and taking their children for being unvaccinated. And one of our petitioners, Tracy Music, she is a military wife. Her husband will be, stationed elsewhere. And so she has the children. And one day, some neighbor complained, and the neighbor said, she's homeschooling her children and the children are unvaccinated. And so CPS shows up. Her husband is away on duty. She's scared. She's like, I don't know what is happening. And they say they need to inspect the children, meaning remove articles of clothing and remove articles of clothing. It is so shocking. So that's one of the things that's in our complaint. And so it's not that this is just some like abstract, we have the right to be natural. Like, there are consequences. The unvaccinated are vilified in society. We are marginalized. We are subjugated. And this is not funny, or some like esoteric right that we're talking about. We're talking about concrete rights. Our petitioners, our people are calling out for help. And we're asking the judge to hear this fundamental call for the existence of natural people to exist. It doesn't get more fundamental than that. And that's what the Ninth Amendment is for.
I'm really glad that you approach that, because that has been a whopping stumbling block for me in my work. Getting that decision, I couldn't even comprehend it. I was like, how is this possible? And Phillips was a very harsh decision. And the courts seem to be coming back down off that, but that's a great response, Greg. Bernadette, I interrupted you. I didn't mean to, and
Oh,
we're
no,
getting near
not,
the top of the show, so let me
not at
give you
all.
the airtime.
This is just such exciting conversation. I
Yeah.
absolutely love what Greg just explained. I've thought about dropping a bill here in Washington or a resolution that just says that human beings have the right to be pharmaceutical free their entire lives. But I like the way you worded it much better there, Greg. And so that's fantastic.
Peacefully natural. You like that?
Peacefully, naturally. Yeah. But I wanted to point out an argument that just occurred to me with this whole, when you enter a court, there's the presumption on the side of the judge that public health is right. And unless they can be shown that, something often happened otherwise. But I would like to put forward this argument that we lack checks and balances when it comes to public health, and that any local state, anybody saying we're doing this and it's right, they're all pointing to the CDC. There's no critical analysis of the information coming down. They're just saying the CDC says so, and we're doing it. And all fingers point to the CDC. The CDC has not done a vax-unvax study. Therefore, nothing can be presumed, right? Because they're not putting forward any new information. All roads lead to the CDC, and the CDC has failed in their duty to check to make sure that their program is safe. Nothing can be presumed. I mean, it seems pretty simple.
I mean, that is how it goes in vaccine court. The vaccines are presumed safe, but I think what Ray and Greg are doing is certainly opening, it's definitely opening a new avenue of argument, and it's actually really brilliant. Anyway, we're getting to the top of the show, so I'm going to give everybody a minute if you want to tell people where they can get more information, where they can support you and pray, because we're all praying. Ray, I'll give you a minute there.
Sure, it's informedconsentdefense.org is the website that not only has the links to the contributions, so to speak, but also to every document that's filed in court so far. So we're going to keep this updated. It has critical information. It has 11 volumes of exhibits that total over 4,000 pages that you can look at yourself. So if you want to know what those definitions are, what the science is behind vaccines, then all you have to do is take a look at yourself. And so the beauty of this whole thing is that Greg and I, to a lesser degree, have put together this entire package, and then we've freely dispersed it to the world for them to look at as well. So I think Greg needs to be commended for his work.
We love Greg. Last time I interviewed him, I said to Bernadette, "Oh, he's so intense." Like, I walked away and I said, I thought I knew everything about vaccine litigation until I talked to you, and now I know even less. But I love what you guys are doing. Greg, why don't I give you a minute here?
Sure. Thank you. Our case is unprecedented. Nobody has ever done what Ray and I are going to do on February 22nd, on Washington's birthday. Our case is about sovereignty. It's about fundamental rights. It sets the foundation where once one understands that vaccination is experimental, it contains neurotoxins, it's harming the public, it's literally accomplishing the opposite of public health, then the constitutional points make sense. Then one understands that, yeah, this is an infringement of bodily integrity. It is cruel and unusual to take someone's healthy children away from them for not engaging in a medical experiment. That's outrageously unusual. It's also involuntary servitude in a medical experiment. And so once that context is set.
I'm sorry, that's an 8th and 13th Amendment argument that Ray was mentioning, and I actually think that's brilliant. That's really, really brilliant.
And just so you have some insights, and I don't think I've ever shared this before, but I was really hesitant actually on some of these claims until I saw all the evidence. The evidence, our 99% confidence interval, we are so well defended. This case is airtight. the evidence is so strong, it only leads to the conclusion that this is a medical experiment upon the people. This is
Indeed.
cruel and unusual. I mean, it was hard for me to say it because it sounds, strange. You think cruel and unusual punishment, you don't think of vaccines, but it's literally where the evidence goes. So
Quite
my job is to
frankly,
present the evidence and the
yes.
case.
And that is the only avenue that you're going to get. Bernadette, I hate to cut you short, my love, but we hit the top of the hour.
No worries.
And, that was really a fascinating show. And like I said, we're hitting the New York area listening area. And I really love you both, and God bless you. And thank you for everybody listening. I'm Patty Finn, the Good Health Lawyer, and you're listening to WRCR Radio, 1700 AM. And be sure to check us out next week. We have another exciting show. Peace out. Thank you all.
The preceding program has been paid for